imagine a film crew, right, literally trucking in 220 cubic meters of heavy, dusty sand into the middle of a modern paved city street.
Oh, yeah. A massive logistical nightmare.
Right. And they just dump it right over the asphalt. They completely bury the modern world, block all the traffic. And for what? Just to make the street look, poorer, grittier, more isolated.
It sounds completely crazy when you put it like that.
Exactly. Why on earth would a production go to such insane, expensive lengths? Well, because in the world of cinema, a city isn't just a physical container for a story. It's a psychological landscape.
Yeah, it's a mechanism. The buildings, the waterfront, the steepness of a street even, they stop being just infrastructure and they start becoming active antagonists or allies, to the characters on screen.
Welcome to this deep dive. Today our mission is to figure out exactly how a massive, bustling physical space, and specifically we're talking about the port city of Haifa, is transformed into this emotional and social weapon on screen.
And we're really focusing on the cinematic representation of Haifa in the third millennium.
Right. And our guide for this whole journey is the fascinating research of Itay Maor from the University of Haifa.
Yeah, and what makes Maor's work so vital, I think, is that he refuses to just leave his research trapped in a library. He actually conducts educational tours for cinema students and just the general public.
Which is so cool, taking the theory into the actual streets.
Exactly. He takes groups out to physically retrace the exact geographical paths of the films we're going to break down today. You walk the spaces, you start way up at the affluent heights of the Carmel Center, and you hike all the way down the mountain to the port, standing in the exact spots where these cinematic choices were made.
Okay, let's unpack this a bit, because before we go any further, for those of us who, didn't spend 4 years in film school, Maor focuses heavily on something called spatial analysis.
Right.
What is that in plain English? Is it just a fancy term for where the director decides to put the camera?
Well, no, it's much deeper than that. Spatial analysis is really about asking, how does the physical space limit or liberate the people inside it?
Okay.
It's not just picking a pretty backdrop. It's looking at how the architecture, the borders, the geography of a city, how all of that actively shapes the narrative. Do the characters have room to breathe? Are they physically trapped by a wall? Do they have to climb a literal mountain to get what they want?
Wow. Okay, so the environment is basically a character.
Exactly. For cinema students, learning spatial analysis completely changes how they understand a script because the physical journey becomes the internal journey.
So if we apply that spatial analysis to the port of Haifa, we really have to look at the timeline first. Because from what I'm reading here in the sources, the camera's relationship with that port used to be incredibly straightforward.
Oh, totally. Early on, it was pure invitation. Back in 1911, the Jewish-British photographer Murray Rosenberg filmed the port for a silent documentary.
Right, the early days of cinema.
Yeah, and by the 1920s, you had pioneers of the local film industry, like Yaakov Ben-Dov and Menachem Levin, and they were shooting these sweeping, majestic, wide-angle panoramic shots of the port and the new factories.
It's basically an ad, right?
Literally, the camera was a tool for tourism propaganda. It captured a thriving, open gateway, essentially telling the world, look at our incredible progress. Come on in.
But then when we transition into modern Israeli cinema, so the films of the late 90s and the 2000s, that open gateway violently slammed shut.
It really does. It's a complete 180.
Modern directors take this massive symbol of international trade and freedom, and they use it to keep people locked in.
Yeah, and researcher Aya Perry-Bader points out this staggering visual paradox in her own spatial analysis. Geographically, the port is the absolute beating heart of Haifa.
It's huge. You can't miss it.
Right. But in modern films, it is represented as a disconnected border. It becomes this distant, unreachable background that the characters can see but almost never touch. There's this profound physical and narrative detachment.
But how does a filmmaker actually do that? Mechanically?
Right.
Like, how do you film something that is literally right in front of you but make the audience feel like it's a million miles away?
Well, it heavily depends on whether the director actually grew up in Haifa or not. That's a huge factor here. Let's look at a native son, Amos Gitai.
Okay, the director of Yam Yam.
Yes, his 1998 film. He works with the acclaimed cinematographer Renato Berta, and they deliberately keep the port and the sea out of reach by manipulating the framing. We rarely get a clean, wide shot of the water.
Oh, interesting. So what do they do instead?
Instead, Berta shoots the outside world from inside moving cars. The camera is physically restricted by the window frames, the glass is often dirty, or the water is deliberately thrown out of focus in the background.
It's like looking at the world through a keyhole. The director is forcing the audience to wear blinders, making us feel the exact same psychological claustrophobia that characters are experiencing. You never get that satisfying breath of salty sea air.
Exactly, which perfectly mirrors the internal state of the protagonist, Moshe, played by Moshe Ivji. He is caught in this chaotic, mixed Jewish-Muslim reality. His daily life is fragmented, he's trapped.
So the camera traps them too?
Precisely. Gitai restricts the visual space to match that trap. The port is pushed to the margins, becoming a symbol of an unattainable horizon. It's a native director's intimate understanding of feeling stuck in your own hometown.
Now compare that claustrophobia to a non-native director. And this brings us back to the sand I mentioned at the very start of the show.
Right, Avi Nesher.
Yeah, Avi Nesher, who directed the 2010 film Payam Haiti, or Once I Was. He's not from Haifa. And his approach, working with French cinematographer Michel Abramovich, is to completely fabricate the city.
They didn't want the real modern Haifa. They wanted a historical, almost mythical version of it. So they physically alter the environment, dumping the 220 cubic meters of sand to cover up the modern asphalt of the lower city.
Which is just wild to think about.
It is. For Nesher, the port isn't a lived-in reality with modern complications. It's an aesthetic stage set to tell his story.
Okay, but I have to push back on this whole concept for a second.
Sure.
We're assigning all this deep psychological intent to these filmmakers, saying they're making profound statements about isolation and boundaries. But isn't there a simpler explanation? I mean, Haifa is built on the side of a ridiculously steep mountain.
It is very steep.
Right. It is physically exhausting to get from the top down to the water. Are we sure this cinematic disconnect isn't just, a practical byproduct of a city with tough topography? Maybe they just couldn't easily get the camera trucks down the hill.
It is the eternal debate in film studies, for sure. But you have to remember, in professional cinema, geography is never an accident. A director will spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to move a camera exactly where they want it.
So the hill is on purpose.
Very much so. If the topography of Haifa is steep, these directors seize upon that steepness to serve as a structural metaphor. The mountain itself becomes the mechanism that divides society. Topography becomes destiny.
Okay, so the physical slope in the mountain is used to map out the social hierarchy.
Yeah.
If you're high up, you have power. If you're at the bottom, you're marginalized.
We see this brilliantly executed in Nesher's Once I Was. He uses the extreme elevation of Haifa to map social extremes. Look at the lower city down by the port. Abramovich lights it to be dark, shattered, and mysterious.
And that's where the outcasts live in the film.
Exactly. This is the realm of Holocaust survivors, smugglers, marginalized folks. But when the narrative moves up the mountain to the Carmel, the lighting completely changes. The upper city is flooded with bright, harsh sunlight. It's bourgeois, comfortable, and populated by native-born Israelis, often referred to as Sabras.
Right, and just for those who might not know, Sabra refers to a Jewish person born in Israel, often associated in these historical contexts with being established, confident, and somewhat removed from the immediate trauma of the diaspora immigrants.
Exactly. And the physical elevation of the Carmel perfectly matches their socioeconomic elevation. The immigrants are literally living in the shadows of the native-born establishment.
Wow. And it gets even more aggressive when we look at Erez Tadmor's 2015 police thriller, Eretz Su, or Wounded Land.
Oh, that's a fascinating example.
Yeah. The cinematographer there, Asaf Sudri, takes this idea of spatial division and turns it into a physical barricade. There's this sequence down at the port where the camera is completely trapped behind these massive, towering shipping containers.
Yeah, Sudri uses a tight focal length so the containers take up the entire frame. You can't see the mountain above. You can't see the water behind. You honestly can't even tell you're in Haifa.
Which is crazy for a film shot in a port city. And what's brilliant about Wounded Land is that it takes place against the incredibly charged backdrop of a suicide bombing and severe police corruption.
Right. Very heavy political themes.
Yeah, but the director doesn't use the city to make a partisan political statement about the real-world conflict. And we should be clear, we're just looking at how the film uses the space. Instead, the port becomes a universal pressure cooker. The characters are physically boxed in by thousands of tons of steel shipping containers, just as they are morally boxed in by the impossible, agonizing decisions they have to make as police officers.
It's a brilliant stress test for the characters. The urban architecture itself acts as the primary obstacle. The physical city enforces the moral and social divide. The port is, down there holding the industrial grit and the trauma, while the Carmel is up there holding the privilege.
And the characters are just desperately trying to navigate the sheer cliff face between those two realities.
Exactly.
So if the mountain is this giant wedge driving classes apart on a societal level, what does that actually feel like inside a living room?
Yeah.
Because these grand, sweeping urban divisions inevitably trickle down into the most intimate spaces.
They do, and this is where spatial analysis gets truly heartbreaking. The physical entrapment of the city perfectly mirrors the internal domestic trauma of the broken families living inside these concrete blocks.
It's a reflection of the city itself.
Yeah. We can see this clearly in two deeply emotional films directed by native Haifa filmmakers. Nir Bergman's 2002 film, Nafayim Shvrol, Broken Wings, and Aaron Merov's 2009 film, Zion V'Achiv, or Zion and His Brother.
Let's really look at the mechanics of Broken Wings, because we follow a mother, played with devastating realism by Arlie Silversatz and her 4 children. They are utterly crushed by the sudden traumatic loss of the father and the grinding poverty that immediately follows. How does the camera use Haifa to amplify that grief?
Well, cinematographer Valentin Bolonogov shoots the port not as a grand gateway, but as a gray, oppressive, mundane background to their suffering. He uses wide shots that emphasize the industrial smokestacks rather than the open sea.
Right, taking away the beauty of it.
Exactly. The family is drowning in grief, and the city offers absolutely no lifeline.
And the film uses the broader geography of Israel as a stark contrast, too. The characters constantly talk about Tel Aviv like it's a different planet.
Oh, constantly.
Tel Aviv represents the center, right? Freedom, artistic expression moving forward. Meanwhile, the periphery of Haifa, with this looming heavy port, represents a socioeconomic trap. The city is a physical weight pulling this broken family down.
And we see a very similar, yet geographically unique, spatial tragedy in Zion and His Brother. Now, this film is set in the impoverished Bat Galim neighborhood.
Okay, what's special about Bat Galim?
Geographically, Bat Galim is unique because it sits right on the water. It is literally next to the sea, flush with the coastline. The story follows a struggling single mother and her 2 sons who are harboring a terrible secret regarding a local tragedy.
The irony in this film is physically painful. You have a family in crisis, and the ocean is right there.
Right.
Ships are leaving for distant continents every single day. The visual promise of freedom is huge and open to the entire world.
But they can't reach it.
Exactly. The director keeps the action confined to cramped, suffocating little apartments. The characters are completely unable to access the freedom that is crashing against the rocks just outside their window.
The proximity to the water only highlights their inability to escape. The physical space is technically open, but their psychological space is an absolute prison.
Wow.
And the family structure in these films, fractured, struggling, isolated, directly reflects the broader social conflicts of Israeli cinema. There are marginalized people living on the edge of a massive economic engine that has completely left them behind.
It makes you wonder, have you, listening to this right now, ever lived right next to a major landmark? A famous bridge, a massive stadium, a historic building, but you felt completely invisible to it, like it belonged to a different world, even though you walked past it every single day on your way to work.
That is exactly how the characters in these films experience the Haifa port.
And that sense of being invisible, of being left behind, really defined the cinematic image of Haifa for nearly 2 decades. The port was an illusion. It was a blurred border behind a car window, a barricade of shipping containers, or a mocking backdrop for a family in crisis.
But cinema is a living art form. It evolves, and eventually a film comes along that shatters this entire paradigm.
This is the part I love. Because for Itay Maor's cinema students walking those tours down the mountain, this next film must be the ultimate aha moment. Because for 20 years, the port is a wall. So who finally breaks the rule?
Elad Kaidan. In 2015, he directs Hayord Lama'ala, known in English as Afterthought. Kaidan is a Haifa native, but he teams up with cinematographer Yoron Sharf to do something radical.
What do they do?
They make the port an active, realized space. It is no longer a blurred boundary. It becomes a space that characters actually touch, navigate, and physically interact with.
The plot of this film is essentially a brilliant cinematic math equation. You have 2 marginalized characters moving in opposite directions across the topography. You have Uri, played by Itay Maor. He's an intellectual, and he is walking down the Carmel Mountain, heading straight toward the port because he wants to get on a boat, escape the city, and sail away.
Right. And at the exact same time, you have Moshe, played by Yuri Klausner. He's a gruff, working-class guy who is walking up the mountain. He starts in the historically impoverished lower city neighborhood of Wadi Salib, and he is hiking up toward the wealthy Carmel, desperately trying to find his wife's lost earring.
But how does Sharf, the cinematographer, capture this visually? Because if he uses the same tight claustrophobic lenses from the 90s, the physical journey wouldn't feel any different.
That's the key. Sharf physically moves the camera with them through the landscape. He uses tracking shots that show the characters actually traversing the stairs, the alleys, the physical infrastructure connecting the upper and lower city.
So you actually see the connection.
Yes. By doing this, Kaiden and Sharf completely redefine Haifa on screen. It is suddenly a connected city. The camera maps out what researchers call a fragile human social tissue. Instead of being fragmented and cut off into isolated socioeconomic boxes, the city is shown as a continuous breathing organism.
It's as if the entire city of Haifa is a giant set of emotional scales. As one character goes down the mountain looking for liberation and an exit, the other character climbs up the mountain looking for redemption and connection. And for the first time in modern Israeli cinema, the city actually allows them to traverse it. The velvet rope is gone. They can finally touch the canvas of the painting.
Exactly. The space is finally realized. The port is transformed from a symbol of alienation and personal distress into a site of active human pursuit. For a cinema student on one of Meir's tours, walking those exact same steps down from the Carmel, the lesson is visceral. You feel in your own legs how the visual representation of a city is never static.
It's always changing.
It evolves as the cultural and social needs of the filmmakers evolve. The port can be a prison or it can be a path. It just depends on where the director places the lens.
Which brings us full circle on the journey we've taken today. We started way back in 1911 looking at panoramic tourism propaganda that promised an open gateway. We then rolled up the car windows in the late 90s, experiencing the claustrophobic, disconnected reality of native directors who felt trapped by their own borders. We stared at massive shipping containers that blocked our view of society's moral failings. We felt the suffocating grief of broken families living right next to an ocean they couldn't reach. And finally, we walked down the mountain in the modern era, stepping onto the docks and feeling the water. We've seen exactly how the visual representation of the port shapes the very atmosphere of the films.
And this underscores the immense value of Itay Maor's work at the University of Haifa. By taking people out into the streets, he proves that the spaces we walk through every single day are heavily loaded with narrative power. The way a city is filmed doesn't just make for an entertaining movie, it heavily influences the national image of that city for every single viewer looking from the outside.
That makes total sense.
Yeah, if you live in Tel Aviv or Jerusalem, your understanding of Haifa is built by these cinematographers. The geography dictates the psychology.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with something to chew on. Think about the city or town where you live right now. If a brilliant cinematographer were to arrive tomorrow and frame your daily life, what local landmark would they put completely out of focus in the background to represent your own unfulfilled dreams?
Oh, that's a great question.
What set of stairs or local highway represents the social divide you navigate every day? Next time you walk down your street or look out at your local skyline, ask yourself, are you simply walking through a physical space or are you navigating your own internal landscape?
A profound question to take with you on your next walk. Thank you for exploring these cinematic streets with us.
It's been a pleasure having you along for the journey. Thanks for diving deep with us, and we'll catch you on the next one.